I'd like to call the meeting to order, being 6:30 or so. So we'll start with a roll call and maybe go around the table. And Henrietta, if you would start us off, appreciate it.
Henrietta Cosentino from Plymouth, an appointment of the Select Board of Plymouth.
David Nichols, Plymouth resident, appointed by Governor Baker.
David Bryant, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
Seth Pickering, Mass DEP, appointed by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
Jack Priest, Department of Public Health, Radiation Control Program Director, appointed by the Commissioner for the Department of Public Health.
Mary Lampert, appointed by the Senate President.
Kevin Canty, representative of the Plymouth Select Board.
Pine Dubois, Speaker of the House appointee.
Mary Gatzlick, House Minority Leader appointee.
Jim Lampert, Speaker of the House appointee.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Mark Lawson, sitting in for John Moylan, HDI.
Dave Noyes, HDI Compliance Manager.
Then can we go to virtual? Mary Waldron, you want to start?
Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council. Good evening.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Jennifer Burrell, Deputy Commissioner, DPH EHS appointee.
And then we have a number of people from the NRC that we will get to later, but that's it for the panel, I believe. Did I miss anybody? Okay, so I want to take one more second and let Kevin Canty introduce himself, since he's new to the panel and he wants to get off to the right start.
Thank you, Pine. So my name's Kevin Canty, was elected to the Plymouth Select Board this past May. I'm the Vice Chair of the Select Board. Before being elected to the Select Board, I was on Plymouth's Advisory and Finance Committee for 9 years. I was the chair of it for the preceding 4 years. So this is a space that I'm very familiar with, but a new role that I'm stepping into. I have lived in Plymouth my entire life. I grew up in West Plymouth. I live in North Plymouth now. My parents still live in West Plymouth, so I have significant long-standing ties to the community, care a lot about its future in relation to the decommissioning of Holtec, as well as obviously broader issues that the Select Board deals with. But I look forward to joining this committee and continuing the important work that we are doing. And thank you all for having me. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And then, Mark, would you introduce yourself? Although you've been here before, it's been a while.
Mark Lawson, HDI, Radiation Protection Chemistry Manager.
Thanks very much.
Pine.
Going on to the minutes.
Maybe we could do after the minutes. I have been asked to read a request to the panel, but it's not long, very short.
Can we
would you prefer to do it after the minutes?
NRC? Can we take that after the NRC, please?
It would actually, it's one paragraph, 2 sentences. It would be appropriate to make the request before the NRC presentation, given the substance of the request.
Give me the request. So minutes. Mary, you want to handle the minutes? Anybody have any?
Yes, I do. On the last page,
pass it on.
There is a discussion on reorganization, followed by a motion to amend.
But sorry, you're.
Thank you. What was somehow just didn't make it into the minutes was after John's comments, and I've quoted them on a page I've given to the Vice Chair, were my comments and those of Mrs. Lampert. And I would like to amend the minutes to reflect what was said. So the additions I would make after the discussion of the reorganization, which is what Mr. Mahoney discussed. Mrs. Lampert said she appreciated that Mr. Mahoney had been very fair and polite to the panel and to the public, and that he has run efficient meetings. And that's at 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 14 seconds of the tape. Mr. Lampert seconded what Mrs. Lampert said. He also said that the characteristics of a good chair are the ability at a meeting to provide all sides of a question to be heard, that the chair has to be impartial in preparing the agenda and running a meeting, and that we have been very fortunate to have had two good chairs. And that starts at 2 minutes, 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 35 seconds. And for accuracy, it should be included in the minutes. And anybody who would like to check it against the tape should feel free to do so.
Anything else? I had a couple of typos with names and so on and so forth. Waldron was spelt wrong, Dubois is a lowercase d, that kind of thing. So nothing evident. Jennifer? No? Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, in the minutes, it says, Mrs. Lampert made a motion to change the formatting of NDCAP's website. Mrs. Lampert listed several changes to the website, types of contents that should be included on the resource page.
Can you tell me what page you're on? Or whereabouts you are? So I
I'm
can
on the
follow.
second.
Sorry? Second page? Okay.
You see where?
Can you start again? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Do you need this, or?
I've got one, I just want to
Oh,
change it
okay.
as we go.
And Mr. Mahoney proposed a motion and discussion for formatting the website be part of next meeting's agenda. Mrs. Lampert agreed. However, seeing as how the NRC is here and we have a very busy agenda, I would recommend instead that we defer this to the next meeting,
Great. That helps.
just to be agreeable.
Yeah, I think that helps, thanks. But that's not a change to the minutes, right?
Well, it's not.
It'll be in this week's minutes.
Okay.
But you're not going to, okay. Anything else? Anybody? There was one thing I thought I had on there. Let me just look at this one. Oh, and can you clarify, Dave, B/C is really BNC waste?
It is.
Okay.
It's referred to either way, but it's
Okay.
Class B and Class C.
Okay. That-
Class B and C waste.
Thanks, I just want clarification. Anything else?
Yeah. May I?
No, you may not. Are you going to move to accept the minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure. I move we accept the minutes.
Anybody a
I'll
second?
second that.
Second online, was that Mary?
It is.
Thank you. Second online. Any further discussion? All in favor? In the room, raise your hand, okay? Oh, I do? Because of the thing? Okay. Henrietta,
Okay.
I'm
So-
told it's a roll call.
Vote yes or no for the
Yes or
minutes.
no? Roll
For the
call.
minutes.
Vote, yes or no?
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm going to abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay.
Yes.
David,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Seth?
Yes, as amended.
Okay, you're going faster than me. You're abstaining.
Abstain.
Yes, Pine?
Yes, Mary Gatzlick.
Yes, as amended, Jim Lambert.
Yes, as amended, Mike Fortini.
I abstain, I was not present.
Yes, Dave Noyes.
Mary? And Jennifer?
Yes, Mary Waldron.
Yes, Jen Burrell.
Thank you. I still get a yes. Okay, passes. Holtec, Dave Noyes, let us know what's been going on.
Pine, I would really like to read
No.
these two sentences before,
No.
okay, we see how the meeting is going.
You can do that later, yes, and you can hold it against me, fine.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
We have an agenda to follow, we're going to follow the agenda. The public will have a chance to talk for a while, but it's after the presentations, just like that.
Okay, good evening. The first page of our presentation is the waterfall update chart. As usual, we update the major work flow streams. The ones that will be discussed in detail in later slides will be the one for the reactor segmentation. We'll have a slide to discuss decon and demolition. There'll also be a slide to discuss waste management. With respect to ongoing efforts for characterization, what's important to see in the first swim lane is that we are still on track for submitting the license termination plan in the fall of 2024 with the requested NRC review and approval of that plan in 2027. With respect to the ISFSI, no change. We still continue to maintain the custody of the spent nuclear fuel and the non-fuel canisters of greater than Class C waste, and continue to perform the security function for that material. For demolition, since the last meeting, we completed demolition on the second of 2 firewater storage tanks. The firewater storage tanks were on the north side of the plant property, adjacent to the intake canal and the intake structure. The firewater storage tank had trace amounts of asbestos in the paint, so that required the review of the plan by Mass DEP and disposal of the waste in accordance with Mass DEP regulations as asbestos-containing waste material. For upcoming demolition activities, we continue to plan for removal of the remaining above-ground storage tanks. The one on the left in the picture was the firewater storage tank that has since been demolished. The smaller of the 3 tanks on the right is the demineralized water storage tank. That was a 50,000 gallon capacity tank. And 2 condensate storage tanks. We've commenced the abatement activities on the demineralized water storage tank. This had a higher concentration of asbestos in the paint associated with that tank, so we have to strip the outer coating of paint off of that tank in accordance with the non-traditional work plan that was reviewed and approved by Mass DEP. Prior to demolition of the Demon water storage tank. The 2 condensate storage tanks, which held the water that was used in the reactor cavity and dryer separator pit during periods of reactor operation, are next for demolition. Those tanks will begin the demolition of those tanks late in October, early November. There is a radiological component associated with those tanks, so that those tanks need to be demolished in a way that we control any radiological material. We do that by coating the inside surfaces of the tank that would prevent any release of material during the demolition process. So this is the current status. In the upper part of the picture are those tanks that I discussed. The firewater storage tank, Demon water, and 2 condensate storage tanks that are next for demolition. This puts us at approximately 80% of the plant footprint that has been demolished down to grade level. For reactor vessel segmentation, this is a depiction of the reactor vessel. This is not the Pilgrim-specific reactor vessel, but it's just a means of being able to show you what has been removed and what remains to be removed. So the shroud head, everything that is red X'd, has already been removed and packaged as waste down to the lower core plate. We've just finished segmenting the 3rd segment of the shroud, excuse me, which is essentially a barrel shaped housing. And the 3rd cut on the shroud was removed. That piece will be segmented as waste. Next up for removal and packaging are the 20 jet pumps. So they're in the outer annulus of the reactor vessel. They'll be cut with wire saw below the water level, and jet pumps will be removed and packaged as waste. And that will allow us to make the 4th and final cut on the shroud. HDI did receive 3 violations of low safety significance. This is in the recently completed NRC first quarter inspection. These violations had to do with security controls for Part 37 materials, so non-fuel radiological material was controlled under 10 CFR Part 37. None of the issues involved a loss of any of the material that was required to be controlled. They were process control weaknesses. All of them have been satisfactorily addressed in our processes, and we are performing a causal analysis to identify any concerns with respect to either extent of cause or extent of condition. For waste management, we've updated our totals for the material that has been safely removed from site. This is all radiological material. So to date, beginning in 2019, with just a small amount of this waste material that was shipped during the last operating cycle, over 225,000 cubic feet of radioactive material and approximately 1,800 curies of activity of radioactive material that has been shipped for disposal. For evaporation, the fuel pool, cavity, and dryer separator pit, and to a certain extent the torus, they are open pools of water. Open pools of water evaporate by nature. It doesn't matter whether heat is applied to that water or not. Any body of water that is open to airflow is going to result in evaporation. The amount of evaporation that occurs is dependent on a number of factors. Those factors include the temperature of the water, the temperature of the surrounding air that's used for ventilation within the building, airflow across the water surface, the relative humidity of the air, and any agitation that exists of the water surface. So there are an awful lot of moving parts with determining how much evaporation would occur under both ambient conditions and a condition where heat might be applied to a pool of water. So I put together some numbers that identify how much evaporation has happened from the plant during operating years, 2016 through 2019. Excuse me. You can see the amount of gaseous tritium that was released due to these open pools of water, and the heat that was generated mostly from nuclear heat, fuel that was stored in the pool. So somewhere on the order of anywhere from 60 curies of gaseous tritium down to about 30 curies of gaseous tritium when the plant was operating. It's important to note that of the remaining volumes of water that exist on site, there's less than 12 curies total in that approximately 1 million gallons of water that exists on site.
Excuse me, Dave, you say 12 minutes, is that only tritium? I was just reading the slide.
That is only tritium. So that is gaseous tritium, and then the equivalent dose number is a dose that is estimated due to tritium, and that's estimated based on the fact that in 2022 there was no noble gas release. There was only tritium release and a small amount of particulate release. So I've just applied that number as if it were all tritium.
Yeah, but my real question was that you said the total remaining tritium in the water is so many curies.
Yes.
Is that the total number of curies of all potential radioactive contaminants in that water?
No, just tritium.
And do you have any idea what the remaining quantity is?
No, I don't. So anyway, for perspective, looking at the equivalent dose that was released due to that tritium, you can see it's on the order of thousandths, if not 10,000ths of a millirem. And just for perspective, as we've talked about before, the average individual receives about 600 millirem of exposure from medical and natural sources just from, living in an area and receiving medical treatments or, absorbing the sun's rays. Individuals receive about 600 millirem, and we're talking with releases due to tritium on the order of thousands, if not 10,000s of a single millirem. So to compare, there was water was heated in the beginning of 2023. The water was heated to reduce the drying time for containerized waste that was removed from the pool. It also improved the localized working conditions for individuals who were on the refuel floor. During the winter months, we were able to heat the water on the refuel floor, which was the primary location of activities within the process buildings. The heating of that water allowed us to minimize the amount of fossil fuel that we needed to burn in order to be able to run the boilers that would have required us to heat the entire building rather than just localized areas within the reactor building. So in installing these heaters in the reactor cavity, we used the facilities design review process. You probably heard it referred to as the 10 CFR 5059 process. So it's a federal regulation that governs modifications to the plant. Those modifications receive consideration of unintended consequences. They have specific levels of review. And in cases where they have the potential to impact the plant's design basis or to result in changes to the plant's accident analysis, those changes would require prior NRC approval. This modification did not. It was bounded by the heating of the water that was done when the plant was operating based on nuclear fuel that was stored in the spent fuel pool. So the net impact of operation of the heaters was to raise the average water temperature in the reactor cavity to approximately 100 degrees. For perspective, when the plant operated, the spent fuel pool going into a refueling outage was typically at about 125 degrees, as was the reactor cavity during some periods in refueling. So the heating of the water was bounded by 25 degrees less than when the plant operated. So therefore, any amount of evaporation due to heating would have been less than what it was when the plant was operating. So an approximate release of the amount of curies of tritium during the period that we were actively evaporating was approximately 1.2 curies of tritium that results in an offsite dose of 3/10,000ths of a millirem. And again, I've repeated the chart that shows the releases for the prior years up to and including 22, and added the prorated heating period prorated to an entire 365 day year, which would have resulted in a gaseous tritium release over 1 year of 4.8 curies. So again, well below all but the 2022 level for the amount of evaporation and release of tritium. That ends the presentation. Pending questions.
Yes. But Dave, I'm a little confused on the evaporation. I assume the inspection report you're referring to is the one that was released on August 4th, and that was the one that Pine circulated to the panel, I believe, on September 11th. Does that evaporation, does that all go up a stack, or how does it get to the outside?
It goes through the reactor building vent,
Okay.
which is monitored.
Is it treated or filtered before it's evaporated?
Not from the refuel floor, it is not.
Is it filtered at all in the vent?
No, not from the refuel floor. There are portions of the ventilation system that do go through HEPA ventilation, but the refuel floor is not one of those areas.
And I guess the one reason I'm a little confused is that when Mr. Trice was president of HDI, you know, was it last January, he issued a paper that talked about various options for disposing of this 1.1 million. And one of the options he obviously discussed, because it's one of the ones the NRC allows, is evaporation. And I think it's fair to say that he didn't like that largely because of cost.
Cost for heating.
Cost of heating, and that you didn't have equipment on site. How much water do you expect, have you evaporated, and how much do you expect to evaporate?
Well, again, it's very difficult because of all the variables, excuse me, associated with evaporation to determine how much of it was due to heating and how much of it was due to the actual evaporation that naturally occurs. But probably on the order of about 100,000 gallons is the inventory has been lost to the 1.1 million total that we've provided before.
And that will continue throughout the period?
It will continue forever. They're open pools of water and they'll continue to evaporate.
Is this distinct from the type of evaporation that Mr. Trice was talking about, where he said he'd have to get heaters?
It is. Mr. Trice was discussing large-scale evaporation that would raise the water temperature significantly higher than the amounts that we're talking about here.
And would it be fair to say that, at least at this point in time, Holtec has no plans for what you just referred to as large-scale evaporation?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up and ask you, do you replace the water that's evaporated?
We replace the water that's evaporated with water that's in the torus. So it does reduce the overall inventory on site, but we still need to maintain that water level on the refuel floor to be able to support shielding and the activities that occur there.
That makes sense, thanks.
Mary has one.
Yes, as far as monitoring the vent, there are no real-time monitors. I understand that the estimates are made to determine how much tritium, correct?
No, they're not estimates, they're measurements. So tritium grab samples are taken once a week. Particulate samples, because we don't get particulate from evaporation, but the work activities that are occurring on the refuel floor can result in some amount of particulate. Those samples are taken continuously. They amass on filters that are changed out, and we do gamma spec to determine what material collects on the filters.
And so you just do gamma, you don't do beta or?
No, we
anything
do
else?
gamma spec, so it's the full range of radionuclides.
And where and when are they reported?
They're reported in the annual off-site release reports
And that will come out?
in March. I think it's March. It might be April.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for the presentation. Obviously, you're accounting for gaseous tritium being released. Are there other radionuclides that turn into a gaseous state that also get released in addition to tritium?
Not associated with evaporation. There are particulate radionuclides due to other activities that are occurring on the refuel floor in cobalt or cesium that we do see on the filters, and those are likewise held to very strict federal limits and reported as part of that same annual dose reporting.
Okay, and what's the limit? I mean, I'm guessing there's an NRC limit of how much gaseous tritium you can release?
There's no specific limit with respect to tritium. There's an overall dose figure, an allowable dose figure.
So you're way below that?
Yes, yeah, very, very small percentage of what's allowed.
Just one more question.
And then the water, you said the water went down by 100,000 gallons. That's just for this year, since you added the heaters?
Yeah, that was for the period that included the heaters. So we've been reporting out 1.1 million gallons. That was accurate as of the end of 2022. Excuse me, the end of 2022. At this point in 2023, we're just under 900,000 gallons.
Okay. So does that mean in 10 years it'll be gone?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it will reach as the material that is in the water continues to concentrate, it will evaporate less and less. But over a period of time of 10 to 15 years, the water would essentially be gone.
Okay. And then, is there part of your plan that takes the heaters that were installed in 2023 out and removes them and then goes back to, I guess, natural evaporation, which would probably be slower?
We haven't decided on the future for heating. There is an opportunity, particularly with the winter months coming again, and us getting ready to start another campaign where we're packaging waste, where there would be an opportunity to redeploy the heaters again.
Okay. Thank you.
But let me just interject here. It sounded like Dave thinks that the heaters are operating all the time, but they're not, correct?
That's correct, yeah. The heaters were secured, excuse me, in June of this year. There's a physical interference, or not a physical interference, but a temperature interference between heated water and the hydraulics of the cutting machine that we use to segment the reactor shroud. So when we got into the cuts of the shroud, we secured the heaters.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
And they're off now.
Got it.
Just one more question, Dave. Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Yes,
I don't think you got me.
Okay, two questions. One, I'm a little confused. You just said that the heaters were secured in June, but I thought you had said February was when they had been installed.
They were installed in February. They were secured in June. They were shut off in
Oh,
June.
secured. I
Yeah.
didn't understand what you meant. Okay, my other question really is just a follow-up on, I think it was Mary who asked about monitoring. You said that the vents are monitored?
Yes, they are.
But how, could you describe the process, the type of monitor and how often you read it?
Okay, so there's a water dropout that measures tritium. That's done in a once per week sample. So a sample is taken once every 7 days. For particulate, the flow is continuously routed through a filter. Sample flow is routed through a filter, and then once a week that filter is changed out, and the removed filter is calculated for the specific radionuclides and the quantity of those radionuclides.
I see. And does this information go anywhere more than once a year?
No, it doesn't. It's amassed and then gets submitted to the NRC once a year.
It doesn't go to the DEP at all?
As part of the reporting that goes to the NRC, the annual reports go to the DEP and MDPH as well.
DPH also, okay. Yeah, okay.
You may have answered my question. I gathered from what you just said that the overall evaporative release includes both, obviously, the evaporated tritium, but also particulates?
That's correct. Yep.
And the particulates are filtered?
Yes. Well, they are captured on filter paper for the purposes of reading them.
But they are not, the entire flow then is not filtered for
No, it's not. There's one zone in the reactor building. It's a zone known as the contaminated area exhaust that goes through HEPA filters. The refuel floor does not.
Thank you.
Does dust settle, or does it go up the vent?
Probably some of both.
But we don't know how much.
How much dust?
Well, I'm assuming you're saying that the segmentation, when there's segmentation that
Yes.
is in the air that causes dust.
Right.
That the
Yes.
filters grab.
Right.
What the filters don't grab, some of that goes up the vent?
Yes, that's right.
And do you know, do you calculate or estimate or are concerned about any of that sort of particulate emission that might be like coal exhaust, for instance, or something stupid like that?
I'm not understanding your
It's going
question.
up the vent.
Yeah.
It's drifting across because it's got, it's got water vapor in there too. is it falling out near the plant outside, or is it just keep going, or is it non-existent?
It's of such small levels that
Okay.
it's non-consequential.
Okay. Jack?
So,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Can you quantify the particulate emissions, Dave, from the plant?
Yes. The radiological particulate emissions, yes,
Do
we
you,
can.
do you have a number, or is that something you can get back to us on?
I can get back to you on it.
So,
Like ballpark, couple pounds?
If I go back to the
Oh, boy.
earlier slide, the footnote,
your radionuclides volume is measured in curies, not in pounds like you do
Yeah.
normal particulate.
so the particulate radionuclides in 2022 were 42 10,000ths of a curie
That
of
was
material.
Tritium, though, wasn't it?
No, that was the particulate. The tritium component was 7,000, 70,000ths.
Could we get to an equivalent mass somehow?
With the specific isotopes, yeah.
You could convert
Yep.
Sounds like fun
could
math to
convert-
me.
by its
Yep.
weight, grams per curie.
It's fractions of a pound, if that helps.
Yeah,
That does
helps.
help, actually.
Yep, okay.
So Dave, the question about, that Pine asked in the building about, that the filter, the sample filters that you use to collect a sample, those samples are representative of the material contained in the building. So when they do that calculation, you're assuming that 100% of that is going out. So when they make
I'm not
this,
making, no, I'm assuming some of it is. That's what I'm
the
assuming.
reality is some of it goes out, but for the purposes of doing these calculations, they assume 100% of it
I
goes
see.
out.
But isn't this just tritium?
The 2022 figures is tritium and particulate. What I did, just for the purposes of being able to demonstrate the small numbers, is I assumed that everything for the prior years were released due to tritium. But those numbers,
Include everything.
the total numbers include everything.
I got you. That's what I was striving for. Thank you very much.
So that 70 is not simply tritium?
The 70 in 2022 is tritium and particulate, 42
And 38 or
10,000ths of it, right?
42 and 20. Thanks, Dave.
Vice Chairman, members of the board, and general public. So I've got some talking points to start with. The first one's water evaporation. So the Department of Public Health and Mass DEP reviewed a letter that was received raising allegations about the use of the immersion heaters at the facility. The letter claims that the purpose of these heaters was to boil away water volume. State review of the letter involved the following. The Department of Public Health shared the letter with the NRC, who indicated that they were reviewing the allegations. The NRC has already inspected the immersion heaters as part of its oversight of decommissioning activities at Pilgrim Station and concluded in an August 4 report that there was reasonable justification for the use of that equipment as part of the decommissioning process. DPH expects any radioactive materials in evaporated wastewater to be a small fraction of the NRC regulatory limits. DPH continues to evaluate environmental samples during the decommissioning process and engages with Holtec should DPH identify any anomalies. Emissions related to the recent use of immersion heaters are not subject to any Mass DEP air permits for the facility and did not trigger any Mass DEP thresholds that would have required Holtec to apply for a permit. Mass DEP has informed Holtec that prior to implementing any potential plan to dispose of the water through evaporation, they need to contact Mass DEP to discuss the potential applicability of any air quality permitting requirements. So as background, the NRC is responsible for the federal regulation and licensing of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. State agencies play a role in the decommissioning process to protect the public health and to ensure state and local environmental interests are met, including monitoring compliance with the Commonwealth's 2020 settlement agreement with Holtec. State agencies include EEA, Mass DEP, Department of Public Health, and MEMA. And they all participate in this process by serving on the NDCAP. So a little more background on the document that was received. On August 22nd, Jack Priest, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Radiation Control Program Director, received notification by receipt of an anonymous letter which included allegations regarding Holtec's use of immersion heaters in the reactor cavity at the Pilgrim Station and potential impacts of elevated tritium levels in air emissions from the reactor building ventilation system. Mr. Priest shared a copy of the letter with the NRC on August 23rd to seek clarity about some of the allegations outlined in the letter. An NRC representative confirmed that they had also received the same letter and were reviewing the allegations. DPH and Mass DEP reviewed an August 4th NRC inspection report, which detailed an engineering change related to the use of the immersion heaters. NRC inspectors reviewed the use of the immersion heaters between April 1, 2023 and June 30, 2023 by the power plant during a scheduled inspection at Pilgrim Station. The NRC determined that there was a reasonable justification for adding electric submersion heaters to the flooded reactor cavity as part of the decommissioning process. Representatives from state agencies contacted Holtec about these activities and reviewed the August 4, 2023 NRC inspection report. And at that time, Holtec provided the following information. Segmentation and removal of reactor system internals had been ongoing since September of 2020. This involves the cutting and removal of parts that are inside the reactor system and are underwater. Recently, materials being removed from the reactor cavity have required packaging for shipping. A total of 9 immersion heaters were placed in the reactor cavity on March 6th of 2023 and were energized for the purpose of warming the water in the reactor cavity. With the heaters in place, the reactor cavity water surface temperature was maintained between 90 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, according to my notes. The letter indicated that water was being heated to 117 degrees, and this could be a mistaken reference to the 117-foot level of the reactor floor, which is the fuel floor. This water temperature range is lower than temperatures in the fuel pool in the reactor cavity during past refueling operations. The immersion heaters were installed for the following stated reasons: the segmentation of radioactive waste being removed from the reactor cavity while the heaters were installed had to be dried under a vacuum for packaging to be shipped off-site. The warmer water in the reactor cavity helped to speed up and shorten the drying process. The warm water in the reactor cavity maintained the ambient temperature on the reactor building refueling floor between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and this provided workers with improved working conditions. And according to my notes, the heaters have not been in use since June 22nd of 2023. Is that accurate, Dave? The NRC inspection summary included the following. The NRC inspectors reviewed documents during an inspection that took place at Pilgrim Station between April 1st and June 30 of 2023. The NRC inspectors reviewed a Holtec engineering change document which authorized the addition of the electric immersion heaters to determine if the change was in accordance with the off-site dose calculation manual and decommissioning safety analysis report for Pilgrim Station. The inspectors performed walkdowns of the area and interviewed site personnel. The inspectors determined that the process Applicability determination reviews and screenings had been properly performed in accordance with 10 CFR 50.59. The inspectors also determined that selected changes under 10 CFR 50.59 did not require NRC prior approval, and safety reviews were performed for design changes and modifications in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements, license conditions, and decommissioning safety analysis report. The inspectors determined that there was a reasonable justification for adding electric submersion heaters to the flooded reactor cavity. The engineering change indicated that this was done to raise the bulk water temperature and improve the vacuum drying time for 4 irradiated hardware waste boxes when they were removed from the cavity. The inspectors also observed slightly improved environmental conditions on the 117-foot elevation of the reactor building as a result of raising the ambient temperature for workers who were performing reactor internal segmentation work. The inspectors also found that releases of tritium through the reactor building ventilation pathway, which will likely increase slightly due to increased evaporation of water in the reactor cavity, were described and bounded by the off-site dose calculation manual. This tritium emission increase from the operation of the immersion heaters was significantly lower than the routine releases experienced during plant operation when newly spent reactor fuel was stored in the spent fuel pool. The DPH's role, so the DPH is responsible for some emergency response activities and ongoing environmental monitoring in areas surrounding the nuclear power plant. Specifically, DPH collects water, seafood, sediment, vegetation, and food crops to represent various stages of the food chain where radionuclides may be identified. Analyses of vegetation and crop samples aim to identify radionuclides that may settle on surfaces or may be absorbed through the roots, and samples are tested for gamma-emitting radionuclides using a gamma spectrometer. In addition to these methods in the real-time monitoring network, there are thermoluminescent dosimeters, TLDs, throughout the Plymouth community that measure ionizing radiation exposure. Groundwater samples are collected from the Pilgrim site and monitored for tritium on a regular basis. And DPH scientists review this information on a regular basis, along with the annual reports from this monitoring that is posted to the DPH website. Tritium gaseous effluent releases are reported to the NRC by the power plant and were a small fraction of the regulatory limits. Historically, DPH has not included tritium air monitoring, and it has not been within the regulatory scope of the department. Let's see, so that's what I have on the evaporation. If everybody's good with that, I'll get into the permit modification request and where Mass DEP is on the surface water discharge permit.
Could I just ask a question?
Get a question, Jim?
Seth, would it be possible for you to provide a copy of what you have read that is just full of facts to the vice chair, so we're going to be attached in the minutes of this
Put it
meeting? I don't
with
think
the minutes?
anybody wants
Sure.
to listen to
Yep.
it.
You
Have
bet.
to go through the tape to keep track.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the permit mod. So as previously reported at the last NDCAP, Mass DEP has prepared a tentative determination denying Holtec's request for a permit modification to discharge decommissioning wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. This was based on the Ocean Sanctuaries Act prohibition on discharge of industrial wastewater. A public hearing was held on August 24th, and over 100 individuals were in attendance. The public comment period ended on August 31st, and Mass DEP is in the process of posting comments with redactions of personal information, would include things like mailing addresses, email address, and phone, on its website. The next step is for Mass DEP to issue a final determination. There is no prescribed time period for the issuance. Mass DEP's final determination would be subject to an appeal under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, the Massachusetts Administrative Procedures Act. Gerard, how many comments did we receive?
Over 1,000.
So there are over 1,000 comments that Mass DEP is processing, so we'll need to respond to all of them that are
Can you
of
be sure we
substance.
have that, the refinement of where it is on your website?
I'm sorry?
Can we have the link of where it is on the website?
I think I got it in here. I can get that to you.
If it's in the report, that's fine, but
Yeah.
if we have it in that, so it can be posted online, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Oh, yeah. You bet. Okay, so any possible appeal process is governed by 314 CMR 2.08, issuance and effective date of permit, general permit coverage, or other determination or request for an adjudicatory hearing. So after the conclusion of the public comment period provided in 314 CMR 2.06 or 2.07, the department shall issue the permit or general permit coverage or determine to deny the permit or general permit coverage. If no comments objecting to the issuance or terms of the permit or permit coverage are received by the department during the public comment period, then the permit or the permit coverage shall be effective upon issuance. If comments objecting to the issuance or the terms of the permit or general permit coverage were received by the department during the public comment period, then the permit or general permit coverage shall become effective 30 days after its issuance. And so this is where the appeal process comes in. So when the determination is made, there'll be a 30-day period during which people can appeal. So during the 30-day period following issuance of the permit, general permit coverage, or determination to deny, any person aggrieved by the issuance or the determination, except an applicant for or permittee with general groundwater discharge permit coverage, may file a request for an adjudicatory hearing relative thereto with the department. So the standing of a person to request a hearing and the procedures for filing such request are governed by Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, and 310 CMR 1.01, adjudicatory proceedings rules for the Department of Environmental Protection. So except in the case of a surface water discharge permit jointly issued with EPA, unless the person requesting the adjudicatory hearing requests and is granted a stay of the terms and conditions of the permit or general permit coverage, the permit or general permit coverage shall remain effective or become effective at the conclusion of the 30-day period. How do you do, Jim? Is that good? Thanks. Okay, so that's all I have on the status of the permit application. It's basically, we're reviewing the comments, and there is no set time period for when the department actually needs to make its final determination, but we're working through the comments as we speak.
I have a question for Seth.
Go ahead. For Seth, go ahead, Henry.
Yeah. Seth, you mentioned just in the last couple of sentences something about except in the case where the EPA and the DEP work jointly. I don't remember the wording, but I wanted to understand how the EPA and the DEP permits interact.
So that would only be in the case of a jointly issued permit, and this will not be the case.
This will not be the case.
That's
okay.
correct.
And is there a possibility that the EPA would make one ruling and the DEP a different
I
one?
can't speak to that.
Oh.
Well, the
Pardon me?
EPA will have their own process.
I see.
Yep.
Okay.
I did ask
Our
EPA
preliminary
to come
determination
tonight,
is
but
out
they
there.
declined, so.
I'm sorry, what was that, Fine?
To Henrietta, I was saying I did ask EPA to come tonight, but they declined.
Okay, so I get a couple other Mass DEP items here. So site assessment work plan, the MCP, response actions under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, MCP, 21E are ongoing with respect to prior notifications on PCBs, metals, and PFAS detected in the soil and groundwater at the site. The Phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, which documents the nature and extent of contamination and contains a risk characterization, is due to be submitted by April 21st of 2024. All right, Trev? As previously reported, as part of cleanup actions, Holtec is conducting groundwater sampling, and the results will be included in status reports submitted to Mass DEP A conceptual groundwater sampling and analysis plan was presented to Mass DEP, and the sampling is expected to occur in the fall of this year, 2023. DPH continues to conduct regular monitoring of groundwater for tritium as well. Other Mass DEP issues, Mass DEP's asbestos section continues to be actively engaged in overseeing the demolition activities occurring at the site. And as Dave indicated, recently we've had a couple of tanks that came under our purview, and we meet regularly with the company to manage the asbestos discovery, identification, abatement, removal process. And Mass DEP is also continuing to evaluate Holtec's request to change its wastewater disposal system at the site to a Title V septic system. Public safety, there's no change to MEMA's update, and MEMA continues to work with the local partners on public safety planning. Good, Dave? So that's all I have for prepared notes. That was a lot. Sorry, Pine, when you asked me the other day how much stuff I need, I didn't have all this yet, so.
Always happy to hear more, Seth. I do have a question, though, and it could be my poor memory. Wasn't there a second or third draft work plan? Was that ever approved, or does it not get approved?
This is the one filed.
It's still under review.
This is one filed in February.
So we're going to get reports from a not yet approved work plan? I mean, just curious about how that works.
It's still under review. I'll say what I said last time.
So
It's not.
I just don't remember what you said last time, so
Well,
say it again.
so, it's the same thing. It's still under review. But it's not holding up any of the work that's being done.
I
It's not-
see that. I'm just wondering whether it's going to, create a problem in the end because there's something we all missed, or, what the review is that could be, creating that sort of question, or, and I don't understand how you're going to go through 1,000 comments. I don't know if you got ChatGPT working on your side or what's going on here, but
Well, we're
that
lucky we
seems
have
like
a couple
that
of
seems
really
like a load,
good
so-
people that work in that program.
Yeah.
And Kathy
It's a
Canaris,
heavy
who was
load.
here for the hearing, is doing remarkable work on
Great.
all that stuff. So I will bring your concern about the work plan to the IWG.
It leaves us feeling a little funny.
Understood.
Okay.
I have a follow-up. A follow-up question to what Pine was just saying. Theoretically, what would happen if the state doesn't approve the plan?
I don't know.
I mean, seriously, can it
Jack,
move forward?
you wanna take a shot at that, Jack?
NRC
So
It's part of the settlement, right?
Yeah, so the commitment was for Holtec to provide the plan and give an opportunity for the state to provide comments back to Holtec, and then Holtec has 30 days to provide comments back to the state. There's no catch that work cannot proceed without that plan being approved. We don't have an approval of the plan. We have an opportunity to review and provide comments.
So what you're saying is the NRC could make its decision to terminate the license, even if that plan had never been approved by the state? Is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that.
Jack, am I right that that 30-day period would have run in October of '21?
No, so they provided us a draft. The state's been reviewing it and has not provided comments back to Holtec. Once we provided comments back to Holtec, Holtec has 30 days to respond to those comments.
But the settlement agreement required the initial plan to be filed so that the initial comments would back in October of '21, am I correct?
I don't have the original settlement
Yeah, I don't have the
in front of
settlement,
me.
but that's probably close, if not spot on.
I mean, I guess I'm not concerned as long as there's continues to be conversation between everybody, and we're all, trying to get to the same goal of a good site cleanup. As long as there's nothing seriously hanging it up,
So,
you know, or
so
an
where they're,
argument going on.
yeah, where,
That's kind of what I'm reaching for.
I think where they're at in their, where they're at in the work process is not impacted by the state not providing comments back to Holtec.
All right, good.
So, of course, as they continue to progress.
How do you feel?
That will tighten our window to get a response back to Holtec.
And they don't feel uncomfortable about all that?
Not that they've
Not,
communicated to us.
they haven't communicated that.
Okay, I'll ask you next month.
They status that?
We've had good communication
Okay.
with both Mass
Excellent.
DEP and MDPH. We're not concerned with proceeding with their understanding of
Or
where we are.
getting thrown another responsibility and,
Yeah, there
dark
is,
of the night.
there are some activities that may need to be reperformed.
okay. Okay,
But not at this point.
okay. Dave?
Just, I want to go back to tritium for a minute and just kind of make sure I understand what's happening here. So, because we've had a lot of conversations about tritium in the Bay, and I thought that all the sampling and all the reporting that came back that talked about tritium, it was because it was a result of atomic testing around the world, and that's where the tritium was coming from.
So tritium is made naturally by sunlight impacting the earth,
Okay.
plus tritium from atomic testing, and then tritium from effluents that could work its way into the bay,
Okay.
historically.
So is there a way to differentiate the tritium that Holtec's releasing, which I guess is now pretty regularly, versus other naturally occurring or other sources of tritium that
No,
might be in any of these samples?
it's not unique. It doesn't have a unique fingerprint that's
Okay.
on it. So what we can do is to sample, and when we do a sample after it's been released, as we've been doing for 40 years of operations, we have not seen an impact through that. So when you see those numbers, like the 3 with 4 zeros in front of it, the annual limit, I believe, is 20 MRAD for a beta emitter for gaseous influence. So 20 versus 4 zeros in front of a 3. So
Okay.
they're significantly less than what the regulatory limits are for a release of effluents. Now, I can't fingerprint it. When we do those type of calculations, it's I don't want to say it's artificial, but it's a projected dose to the members of the public. And it's, like, as I said before, when they take a sample inside the plant, it's pretty much the worst-case sample. It's a sample that's representative of what's in the building. Some of it could play out inside the building. When they do that calculation, they assume 100% of it went out to that individual, and they make assumptions on the size of the individual, their breathing rate, the amount of time that they're exposed to it, all of those kind of worst-case conditions to calculate that number.
Okay. So
So-
essentially, this release then kind of just blends into the background tritium that's already out there in the environment?
Correct.
It's
It would
like
not,
there's a spike.
it would not be distinguishable.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I would like to say something here. I would like to read the letter from the Cape Downwinders to the
Henrietta,
NDCAP,
not right now.
because this is directly relevant
And it
to
will be,
what.
and it will be relevant later, too.
Yes.
Please hold, just to keep the order of the mission. I want to get NRC up here. We got a lot more to go through.
Pine, this is
Okay.
2 sentences.
It's not 2 sentences.
It actually
It's
is 2.
it's a request for action,
Okay,
and
there's
we're not
3
going to take it up.
sentences.
Sorry.
It's also a question of agendas and how they are set.
Well, that's fine. We
That
can talk
the
about that
the
at the last,
agendas
at the
have
last
never
item.
been responsive to the desires of panelists.
Well, nobody's paying
Or
nobody.
to the desires of the public.
All right,
And this is one
Henrietta.
of the reasons, this is one of the reasons for
Henrietta,
the left.
please, we'll do it later. Thank you.
Pine, you asked about the link to the permit modification application. The link is already at the NDCAP website.
Okay.
So, I'll triple check on that, but that's
As
what
long as it's there, I just want to make sure that it's easy to find for people. you
People
know.
can find
And so
it.
if it's with the report, then it's all fine. I know that I've looked at it before, I just haven't looked at it recently.
Okay. All right.
So I know it's available, I just don't want to have everybody have to search the mass.gov
Yeah,
website.
agreed. We want to make it easy for people to find it.
Okay, can somebody,
Good.
Jack, maybe? Jack is the one to do this? Can you translate the millirem picocurie 2022 into picocuries up there? What's the .000070 in picocuries? Just so I understand what the relationship is between those two
Yeah, so,
common,
so that,
variants.
I believe that column on the far right, is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, well,
That's millirem, that's dose. So the limit, the annual limit for gaseous effluent, it has to be less than 20 millirad, essentially 20 millirem. So the number specifically for that, for 2022, is 7/100,000ths of a millirem.
right. But if it were a picocurie, what would it
But
say?
it's not. So you're talking apples and oranges. So
I know, but when I read something like EPA and it's like in the drinking water, it's 40,
it's,
whatever.
right, so.
That's
so-
what I'm just trying to understand how
So it
that
doesn't
translates.
relate, so I can't.
Okay.
I can't do that. I
Okay.
can say that a picocurie is, you need 1 million picocuries.
That's what I'm
to get a
looking for.
curie.
That's what I'm looking
So
for.
2.38 curies would be 2.38 times 1 million, so it would be 23.8 million picocuries.
Okay, thanks.
If I did my math
It's
correctly.
just, it took me a while to realize how many different ways of talking about radiation there is.
Right.
And if you didn't study it, you don't know.
I'll give you an official translation of that, and I'll send it to the panel members so they
Excellent.
can understand it.
Excellent.
But don't trust my math.
Okay. Is
All
that
set?
anything else?
Not unless there's a question. Good.
Anything else from the panel? I'd like to invite the NRC to take
Thank
the
you.
stage and to let us in on how you regulate things and all of the stuff we need to know. Introduce yourselves if you wouldn't mind, and welcome. And thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. And this is Bruce Watson. I've been here before, and I'm with the NRC out of headquarters, the Office of Nuclear Materials Safety and Safeguards, which regulates the decommissioning and other types of activities that the NRC does. Paul, you want to introduce yourself?
Happy to be here tonight, talk to you from an NRC regulator perspective. So my name is Paul Crone. I'm a director in Region 1. The inspectors here that do the decommissioning inspections and effluent inspections at Pilgrim work for me.
So let me just make a comment today. It's great to be here and back in Plymouth. Had some great seafood down near the waterfront here. I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay, and there's none better here than there is in Virginia. So let me just make that appreciation for the area. Yeah. So I'm here. Can we go to the first slide, or at least Watson? Yeah. I thought he'd have it up by now, but. So I'm here to give you an overview of the 5059 process, or 10 CFR 5059 as it relates to reactors and decommissioning. It is the review process that are followed by licensees to ensure that activities are performed in compliance with license requirements. So you're going to hear that from me about 5 times tonight. Let's go to the first slide, please. Oh, we do. What do you know? Yeah, so does the NRC review have to review or either approve or disapprove every decision that the licensee makes related to decommissioning? And the answer is no. There's a process we have. We do not review every decision the licensee makes related to decommissioning of the facility. The licensee may make changes, all kinds of types of changes without prior NRC approval, provided they are consistent with the license for the facility and the license basis documents that govern the operations at the facility. And of course, that includes the safety analysis report. So, as far as conduct of decommissioning activities, I want to point out to you that in operations, they are allowed to make the changes, that licensees can make the same changes in using 5059 as they can in decommissioning. However, in decommissioning, we put 2 caveats in the regulation related to the PSDR, and that restricts them from making any major changes within 90 days after they submit the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. But they can take actions permitted by 10 CFR 5059, but they have to notify us prior to doing those during that period. So it's kind of a reminder, you're allowed to do this process during operations. It continues in decommissioning, and so the licensee can make these types of decisions during decommissioning.
So what makes something minor or major or stuff?
Well, they provide for us a post-shutdowns decommissioning activities, which outlines the major activities, also the schedule. So any changes to that, we would expect them to come to us and get approval for it. Yeah. They can continue to make changes to the plant that don't affect the license. Because there are a lot of license changes during that transition they go from operations to decommissioning, right? So just as kind of an overview of 5059.
Wait a minute. Am I correct that the NRC does not approve a PSDAR?
We do not approve the PSDR. It
And
is a
so
report.
that seems insignificant here.
But it is a report. It is basically the licensee's outline of what they're going to do and how they're going to do things. And so from that, it is a report to us that they provide to us that we expect them to follow. So does everybody else. It's a communication tool, not only for us, but for the state and for the local community to know what the activities are going to be associated with that decommissioning of that particular facility over the lifetime of the plant.
Yeah, why I'm looking concerned, if you have a document that is submitted by the licensee, is not required and is not approved by the NRC, but then it becomes important here that any changes be consistent with an unapproved document.
Yeah, but it is reviewed by us for consistency of that, what the contents are, and so we expect them to follow it because it's basically a letter outlining their commitments to what the process is going to be. So
Bruce, how do you handle updates? No, the question is, how do you handle updates to the PSDAR?
we'll get to that. So with 5059, it is a regulation that allows the licensees to make changes to determine whether a prior NRC review and approval is needed if the proposed activity is within the NRC license. And they may conduct those activities then. It is not a safety evaluation. The focus is on the NRC approval that is required prior to implementing the change. What they'll do is they'll do this review against the licensing basis, the particular licensing documents, and they will provide a technical justification, which you heard the write-up in their 5059 evaluation. But the technical evaluation is not a conclusion. A change that may appear to make sense or good engineering judgment may not necessarily be allowed without prior NRC approval because the license has to specifically address it. And if it's not addressed as an applicable thing, then they have to come to us for approval, or if it's outside that safety envelope, as we would call it. So we do the review of the 5059 evaluations are reviewed at least annually during decommissioning. We have an inspection procedure, as you see there, 37801, safety reviews, design changes, and modifications that permanently shut down reactors. That is conducted at least annually. And so the inspectors take a close look at all the inspection, the 5059 reviews conducted by the licensee during the year. They can do them at any time. It does not have to be a specific scheduled inspection for that purpose. So I thought I'd just give you some examples of the licensing basis requirements. Of course, they include the license and its amendments. And when we get to it, the license termination plan for Pilgrim, when it's submitted and approved by the NRC, assuming it's going to be approved, will also be part of that process, because that's a license amendment. Also includes the technical specifications and, of course, the defueled safety analysis report, along with the radiological environmental monitoring program, our safety evaluations in support of the previous operating license and submittals that have been submitted to us, along with the quality assurance program and the physical security plan and emergency plan. So those are just basic examples of the licensing basis. So it all gets integrated. In summary, the 5059 process is implemented by the licensees to determine that the proposed licensing activities are compliant with the licensing basis. And of course, for effluents, this would include the environmental tech specs and also the off-site dose calculation manual. They all have limitations in them. So the licensee determines the decommissioning activities that can be performed safely and are compliant with the NRC requirements. And of course, this includes the method for releasing effluents from the plant as long as they're compliant. And again, I want to point out that the NRC project managers and Paul's inspectors have frequent calls, periodic calls, typically every 2 weeks, if not more, or to have discussions with the Pilgrim management over what activities are planned at the site, so we can inform not only the inspection process, but what licensing activities might be coming our way to process. Again, I want to reiterate there is a dedicated inspection procedure for looking at 5059 changes. So, So I thought I'd just take a minute and talk about tritium facts in perspective. There's a lot of misinformation I'm seeing out on the internet and on the website and the webs. So I just want to reiterate that tritium is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. The radioactive hydrogen rapidly incorporates the water molecules and cannot be removed. Since it really is, we call it tritiated tritium, but really it's tritiated water, or commonly known as tritium. It does emit a beta emitter of very low energy. It can't penetrate the skin, and it has a radioactive half-life of 12.3 years. So it's not long forever like the spent fuel. Tritium is produced naturally in the upper atmosphere, where cosmic rays interact with nitrogen atoms, and that process also produces carbon-14 and beryllium-7, so those are naturally found in radioactivity that's found in the environment. Tritium can be found in very low concentrations in lakes and streams, sometimes around 4 picocuries per liter. Tritium is used in very large quantities in medicine, industry, and research at universities and other research institutions. And I'm sure that's the same here in Massachusetts with all your universities and research institutions. It's used, I know, in a variety of medical issues too. In these applications, the tritium is released to the atmosphere or by the sanitary sewer system. It's not monitored, it just goes out. The defense complex uses tremendous amounts of tritium in the making of our defense weapons. I want to mention that inorganic tritium is produced by reactors, and the effluents, as according to EPA, the releases are the small fractions of the natural background background rate of production rate. So it's out there, but it's inorganic. Inorganic tritium does not bioaccumulate because the water turns over rapidly in biological systems. Tritium in the human body is cleared rapidly from tissues. And this is another EPA fact sheet item. It only has a 10-day biological half-life. So I left here a couple places where you can go. I know you already have the Health Physics Society tritium fact sheet. I saw you discussed it at one of your meetings before, but I think it makes for interesting reading as for a statement of fact from an independent source of experts. Harry and Paul are going to talk about this particular chart again later in their presentation, but I want to point out that the doses from tritium in particular during the past few years have been really small and insignificant compared to the 620 millerem that each of us are going to receive by being here on the earth from natural and also man-made sources of radiation. And another fact is that living near the vicinity of a nuclear power plant, the average dose is going to be less than 1 millirem per year from plant operations, and that even goes down during decommissioning. So I wanted to leave you with those two reminders. I did find out, look, we had a little researching here, and there is a 10 CFR 20 tritium limit for effluents in air. Is 1 times 10 to the minus 7 microcuries per ml. And if you go and look at 10 CFR 20, the appendices in there has limits. Okay. All right. Okay. So in air, the effluent release limit in 10 CFR 20, and it's in the appendices, it has a listing of all the radionuclides release limits for water and air. And so the limit is 1 times 10 to the minus 7 microcuries per ml. Now, I know that introduces another, another measurement or data point, but I want you to know there is a limit for it. I was going to calculate
Let me help
the
Pine.
2.38, but
So 1 million microcuries, 1 million microcuries per curie. What is that, a million billion?
Yeah.
For a picocurie, 10 to the 12th for picocuries to curies.
I just want to make sure we all understand.
Yeah. I just, there is a limit, is what I want you to know, and we can provide that information, or you can look it up on our website in 10 CFR 20. They're all listed there. Just giving that particular information, that kind of concludes my remarks, and I'll have Paul take over.
Oh, can I just ask you a question? I noted that you talk about inorganic.
You just turned it off.
Oh, jeepers. Thank you. I noted you talked about inorganic, but what about organically bound tritium?
It's not produced by the reactors. All the water chemistry from a power reactor is inorganic.
I understand that, but once it gets into the environment, then you enter the OBT world.
Yeah,
and so I think that would be a good addition.
You know what?
That's a very small, insignificant, I'll just say, quantity compared to the amount of inorganic tritium that's released.
So Mary, a good and fair question. When I go through my remarks, I'll touch on that. If I miss it, please remind me.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Bruce. I want to do a sound check here. Harry, are you on?
I am on. Paul, can you hear me okay?
We can, good. Harry Agnostopoulos is an NRC employee. He is a health physicist and one of the inspectors who has been inspecting Pilgrim. So I wanted him available to answer and be able to address some of your questions tonight. And that will come to your point, Mary. Okay, so my goal tonight is to give you an overview of our review of the submersion heaters and some context. You heard a lot about tritium. I'm going to give you some more context on tritium relative to these heaters. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 central categories. First one, allowable liquid effluent paths. The NRC is an outcome-based organization. Our ultimate concern is what goes to the public, right, in terms of radiation. So the method is not something we regulate. We regulate the outcome, i.e. the dose, the millirem units you've heard. Okay? Evaporation considerations during operation. Like some of the tables you saw from Holtec, we have our own tables that'll look at the history so you can see how much evaporation has occurred historically through normal plant operations. Also, I'll give you some perspectives on evaporation as a waste disposal method. If you look back at TMI, back from 1979, they had a lot of tritium on their hands. How did they get rid of it? In summary, they evaporated. Okay, it's a matter of record. I'm sorry?
They did an EIS first.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the submersion heaters we've all been talking about, I'll give you some specifics on those. And finally, our inspection oversight activities and why we have confidence in the outcome and what we put in our inspection report of August 4th. So let's talk a little bit about the allowable liquid effluent disposal paths. You see the first 5 bullets pick up the main categories of them. You can break those down into some subcategories and essentially come up with as many as 9. But again, we regulate the outcome, not the method. That's the point. And you're going to hear me talk about this. You've heard these 2 terms. Off-site dose calculation manual describes how the site is licensed by the NRC to make releases. Okay, that's a legally binding document, part of the licensing basis that Bruce mentioned, that we hold them accountable for. And then the annual radioactive effluent release reports. We talked about that before, right? Issued March, April every year for the previous year. Captures all the effluents. So keep that effluent report in mind for the last table I'll get to in the end that Bruce teed up. Again, 1979 TMI accident. The NRC reviewed 9 methods proposed by the licensee at that point. We found them all to be acceptable. Ultimately, that licensee chose evaporation. And that's all a matter of record. So what this next slide is telling you is that evaporation, and it's been mentioned here before, is routine. Can't be avoided, right? You have large open pools of water exposed to atmosphere. It's like the pool in your backyard. You're going to get evaporation. Point here is the plant was initially designed, it still is designed now that it's being decommissioned, to allow some level of evaporation, and that's why you have an effluent monitoring program. That's captured in that document, Off-Site Dose Calculation Manual. We say ODCM. If you look at the boiling water reactors, of which design Pilgrim was one of, and you look at 2020, and you look at the average curies released of tritium nationally, during operation, you would find that between 40 and 45 curies of tritium are released nationally by each operating boiling water reactor. Okay, so again, that's context and perspective. So keep that number in mind for the last slide again. So during Pilgrim's last full year of operation, which was 2018, they shut down in mid-2019, the annual effluent report, again available online, showed the release of 34 curies of tritium. Now, we talked a bit about, and I don't think there's anything I'll add about the gaseous effluent monitoring paths, continuous samples versus grab samples. I can tell you I was on site today and walked down the sampling equipment where the samples are taken. I didn't find any issues with it. Harry can provide perspectives later, but he walks that down as a subject matter expert on those systems as part of our annual inspection. The idea of evaporation, too, was originally designed into the plants. The plants of Pilgrim's vintage were constructed with something called a liquid rad waste evaporator. They were in operation at Pilgrim for about the first 5 years of operation. And then as technology progressed, resin-based ion exchange methods came along. So it was changed, and that liquid rad waste evaporator was retired. So let's talk a little bit about the August 4th report. Gentlemen read some of the detail from it here before. So we do different parts of an inspection through the course of a year for an effluent inspection. We contact the licensee weekly, and we say, what are your major activities? And they say, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And we say, oh, okay, that's a risk-significant activity. I'm going to come out and put a body on the deck plate and look at that. So when we were out doing one of those inspections in April 2023, it came to our attention that there were some submersion heaters in the cavity. So we started pulling the string on it. When you get into the engineering change document, which we did, Harry did extensively, he inspected it, you can see that the primary purpose was to raise the water temperature, as we discussed, to help the loading of waste. Taking the water out of it, dehumidifying it, shortening that time. Another reason was because of the habitability on the spent fuel floor. In the winter, it gets cold, the workers were cold, fingers are getting stiff. You know, you want them to be able to do work safely and competently. And then finally, that engineering change request we spent quite a bit of time on did mention evaporation. So when we saw the evaporation, we said, okay, what could it be? And then, is it bounded? Is it bounded? Is it within that design box Harry talked about? That's where 5059 comes in, okay? So 5059 has a series of 7 or 8 screening questions that the licensee has to ask themselves, and it tells you whether they're outside what we've licensed. Bottom line is, if they're outside that box, they have to come to us for permission. So, what came out of our review? When we looked at it, pulled all the strings, did all the calculations, they were still inside that box, i.e. they didn't have to come to us for permission. Okay, so they could make this change, because remember that off-site dose calculation manual? It was well bounded within all of that about what could be released to the environment. Bruce gave some background on tritium. Tritium is water, right? It's a form of water, right? So it's very hard to separate water from water, quite literally. But there's some talk about particulates we've had here too. Particulate is, it's just that, right? It's a particle. So that's why you have to have a separate filter system with a paper, and you catch the particulate on the paper, and then you count the paper, and it tells you what you had, right? You can't, and picture particulate, if you ever had a tea kettle on your stove boil dry, and you get that hard crust on the bottom, that's particulate, right? So the question we had before about all the tritium, or all the water evaporating away, what would be left behind? That hard crust. Would it have activity in it? Yeah. But it would be like that hard crust in the bottom of your teapot. Right. I mentioned the August 4th report. A little bit about our oversight activities. So you heard a little bit about the different pathways for the vent stack system. I'm not going to reiterate those, but all of those limits are governed by the off-site dose calculation manual. And again, hold up for the last slide. As Holtec mentioned, there are periodic sampling for particulates, and it gets caught on a filter paper. Those are changed out and analyzed. In terms of sampling for tritium, current sample rate is weekly, frequency is weekly. The ODCM would make it monthly. After some engagement on our part, licensee is doing it weekly. Again, all of those reports come out for the previous year in the March-April timeframe. Oh, some of you have asked how often the heaters were energized. The answer is, by our record review, 91 days in terms of duration. And then you heard some numbers about how much water might have evaporated due to the heaters, et cetera. I think the licensee mentioned 100,000 gallons. Our estimate is about 90,000, same ballpark number, right? So our estimate, and again, it depends on what assumptions you have, right, atmospheric conditions, but our estimate of the release of tritium from the heaters over that 91 days is about 1.88 curies. Again, it's a lot of zeros and a 5 millirem at the end. 5 e to the minus 5. It's a similar number to what you had before. And again, those very small numbers are in comparison to the 620 millirem we all get from being alive, right? So when you do the division and the arithmetic, it's several million times below what you get, actually 12 million times below what you get just being alive. With that, Harry, do you want to discuss some of the table?
Certainly, I'd be happy to pause my volume. Paul, how's my volume?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Yeah, no, it's good. You're fine. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm waiting for the screen to change over to your slide.
Okay, I have it up here, so it might take a moment.
All right, well, I've got a copy here, so let me go to my copy as well. So unfortunately, Bruce and Paul kind of stole my thunder. So you've seen this chart before. So let's just talk kind of at a high level here. The purpose of the chart was just to add some perspective. And you've heard several times before that all reactors, boiling water reactors and pressurized water reactors, have spent fuel pools, and those pools do evaporate water. Some of that naturally, some of that from the heat of the decaying fuel inside the spent fuel pool. And these releases of tritiated water vapor happen, and they're pretty much unavoidable. So on the chart, you can see that in 2018, which is the last year that Pilgrim was operating for an entire year, the estimate of tritium released is about 34 curies of tritium. And why is that important? Well, when this whole water conversation started, Holtec estimated that they had between 21 and 28 curies of tritium in their 1.1 million gallons of water that remained to be disposed of. So you can compare just an average annual gaseous release rate to the total amount of tritiated activity in the water that remains to be dispositioned as a result of decommissioning. You can see in 2020 with decay heat as a result of fuel in the pool from the heat-driven evaporation was about 7.7 curies of tritium. In 2021, when they were moving fuel, because the water is agitated a bit, it was up to 8 curies. And then in 2022, with no fuel and just the evaporation of water, so far about 2.38 curies. So that puts all of that into perspective for you. The heaters did increase the evaporation rate, but as you can see, and as we stated earlier, it's insignificant compared to the amount of evaporation that would be driven from the decaying fuel in the spent fuel pool. What else do we want to talk about here? Oh, well, first, hello, everybody. Again, as Paul mentioned, I'm Harry. I was the lead decommissioning inspector with Pilgrim. I've been inspecting since 2019 when the plant shut down. And I am the individual that wrote that second quarter NRC inspection report. And I'm the individual that put eyes on the heater and went up and observed sampling from the reactor building vent monitors. So I'm best able to answer your questions for you. The other thing that I wanted to point out for you, as far as dose, these numbers here, you can see they're very, very small, fractions of a millirem. These numbers, of course, are so small that they can't be measured. What can be measured is a representative sample of the tritiated water vapor that is leaving the reactor building vent stack. And after that concentration of tritium in water is measured quite accurately, then there's a series of calculations based on metrology and location of the nearest member of the public in order to infer a dose as a result of that. And that's a standard method that's used across all of the power plants around the nation. However, that process is also backed up by a radiological environmental monitoring program. That is required to be conducted prior to operation and then during operation and then also through decommissioning. So environmental media is collected and analyzed by the licensee. It's put in a publicly available report. And then we do inspect that on an annual basis, and there's an inspector actually on site this week looking at that radiological environmental monitoring program. That program includes sampling of surface water for tritium. And then the other comment I wanted to make, I heard, I believe Mary talked about organically bound tritium. And yes, organically bound tritium is a phenomenon. I was working at the Department of Energy's Mound Laboratory when that issue first was identified. And the Department of Energy's documents now for the safe handling of tritium are all based on that work that was done at the Mound Laboratory while I was there. What we know from that research work at the Mound Laboratory is that in generally a very, very small amount of the tritium is in tritiated water vapor is converted to organically bound tritium. There are two components. There is a short-lived organically bound tritium, and there's a long-lived component. In general, tritium turns over in the body with a half-life of about 10 days. If there's organically bound tritium, the short-lived component will clear in 20 to 30 days, and then the long-lived compartment will transfer in the area of 200 to 300 days. And it turns out that only a very small fraction of tritiated water vapor is converted to organically bound tritium. In terms of dose, it's only about 5 to 10% of the dose. So it's a very, very small fraction of a very, very small fraction. So we would say 5 to 10% of, well, let's take a look at 2022, 0.000007 millirem. So organically bound tritium is a phenomenon at Department of Energy facilities where there are gigacuries of tritium being handled for the weapons program, and there are oils, pump oils that contain large amounts of hydrogen. Organically bound tritium can be a concern, but it's not likely to be a significant factor here for this type of decommissioning. Paul, that's what I had for comments.
No, I appreciate that you brought up the organically bound tritium, because I was, so you got to it. But Mary?
Yes. I think quite clearly you have a different situation of being in a marine environment, having over 50% of the winds going over, let's say, Cape Cod Bay. And there's been a lot of research on OBT on shellfish. Actually, Plymouth University in England is one of an interesting group that's doing a lot of research on the impact on mussels and other bivalves, which is considerable concern here. So if your estimate on the effect in percent of OBT is based on someplace out in Colorado, or I don't know where the DOE facility was, not being relevant particularly here. That's my concern.
Fair comment, Mary. Fair comment.
And could I just follow up on a question that was raised there?
Yeah.
In terms of your work, do you look at the OBT in the food chain?
You want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
And how do you do so?
I just wanted to make a comment on your comment, in that, we have tritium that's naturally in the environment. And if it was truly lots of inorganic tritium in the environment, you would be seeing that in the shellfish you're talking about today. I mean, it's naturally out there. If it does truly bioaccumulate, it would continue to bioaccumulate regardless of the source of the tritium. And so, it's naturally found in the water and the environment. And
well, what I was referring to, and I can actually send you 60 pages of summaries of research on bivalves, that much of it initially was done in laboratories.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can probably find ample information from
and
Woodsole right here in Massachusetts on
I take your
tritium.
point, but you do have an emitter, i.e. the reactor, and you do have an addition.
And I don't dispute that.
Yeah.
But I also will say that it's an insignificant amount of exposure in comparison to the natural background and the natural tritium activity on the planet, in the water and everything. So, thank you.
It's adding more.
Can I have some, from what I heard about Dave's presentation is we're just about cut up the reactor.
Yeah,
How much longer we got to go on the reactor, Dave?
The reactor vessel itself won't be cut up for probably 4 years.
Okay.
The internals are within a couple of months of being completed.
And Pine, for clarity, the spent nuclear fuel, i.e. the fuel rods, those are on dry casks on the pad, have been for some time.
Oh, we're well aware of that.
Right. There's no power production. What is there is legacy.
Sorry, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'll good thought, Pine. I'll let Harry tag on to me at the end. I mean, what's happening now is essentially cutting up metal components underwater. Right? So what do you generate from that? You generate particles, not tritium. Tritium is a fission product type of issue when you have a fission reactor running. Okay, so Harry, anything to add?
I have one question.
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Could you repeat it for me?
Current operations, decommissioning operations, what kind of radioactivity would they generate at the plant? Segmentation of the vessel, for instance.
Yeah, well, segmentation, is an aggressive process done underwater, so that's going to liberate some corrosion products and some activation products, but that's all underwater, captured in the water, processed by filtration and ion exchange processes to a very, very high efficiency. So essentially leaving behind tritiated water with a very, very small fraction of other reactor-produced radionuclides. And, those are all reflected in the annual effluent reports. I would imagine they would be on the order of previous discharges. So, any member of the public could go back to the old environmental reports and see what those looked like. But again, Dave or Mark would be able to speak to that probably to a better degree than I could.
One question, fine. Harry, I think you used the word, you said that evaporation was unavoidable. Did I hear you correctly?
That's correct, yes.
What would you have to do to reduce it as much as possible?
I don't think I could speak to that. I think you'd have to talk to the licensee and see what options they could come up with.
But basically, has the NRC looked at what licensees as a whole, not particular plants, let's face it, there are who knows how many out there, what you would do to reduce the amount of evaporative tritium and other particulate materials to a minimum if you wanted to do so?
No, it hasn't come to our attention because, again, we regulate based on objectives, and the doses, again, are a very, very small fraction of the limits. So the licensee would not be prompted to look at those types of activities.
Yeah, if I can just add a couple things, Harry, to Mr. Lambert's question.
Jim will do.
So anyway, yeah, you can reduce the amount of evaporation by cooling the water. I mean, as we all know, the warmer the water, the more evaporation takes place. However, but you can't stop it. So even when it would be formed like snow, when it's frozen, there's this process called sublimation, which the solid turns into a gas, and the water would go that way. So, there's no real stopping it. It may be slowing it, but you can't stop it.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going, Bruce, is I know you have dose limits, and I know that's what basically controls it, but there are a lot of basic statements in the NRC materials, usually with respect to ALARA, that say, really straightforward, obviously the best release is no release. And if there are ways to reduce it, why doesn't ALARA, why doesn't your procedure get more deeply into that?
I would have to say that ALARA, your interpretation, it's zero. ALARA means as low as reasonably achievable. So that doesn't mean zero. It means as low as we can.
I didn't say that my interpretation was zero.
Well, that's what you're telling me, that
what
the
I
intent is
said
zero.
was there's at least one NRTC paper that says the best, obviously, would be zero.
Yeah. I'd like to see
Bruce,
that paper, but yeah.
Bruce,
Go ahead,
I'd like
Harry.
to speak to that just real quick.
Go ahead.
So ALARA is described in our regulations, and particularly 10 CFR 50 Appendix I describes the design objectives for power plants and their power plant emissions. And there's a statement in there that says if the Appendix I limits are met, then by definition, they have achieved ALARA. And again, these emissions are a small fraction of the Appendix I limits.
Pine, anything
So
else?
I guess when I was going down the road of the reactor road here, what I was thinking was that whatever tritium has been generated by operations is over. It
Correct.
may be released into the water, but where does the half-life breakdown start? Does it start when it's released into the water, or is it already going on in the plant?
It's a now thing. It's happening as we speak.
That's what I thought. So,
It's just an atomic process.
with every day, there's less and less and less
Correct.
by natural processes.
And let's say you took, 3 half-lives, right? It's a half of a half of a half. So 3 half-lives, 36 years, 1/8. You see how it compounds?
Pine, I guess I don't see how it compounds. So, so when is it gone? If you just left it there and there's 12 curies left?
Mathematically?
Right.
It
I mean, never
reaches something
down to,
we
like,
call an.
when does
never
it go
reaches
down
zero.
to?
Rule of thumb is 7 half-lives.
Yeah.
So how many years is that?
7 times 12, 84, give or take.
Okay. So theoretically, in 84 years, if you left it there, there wouldn't be any tritium left.
Yeah, it's 2 to the power of
That would
7,
be-
so whatever that is, 256, factor reduced.
Excuse me, isn't it 10 half-lives? Isn't that the rule of thumb? It's 7. I was.
7 is 99% of the activity is gone.
Right.
So everybody all set? I want to open it to the public. Sorry. Thanks, Chris. Yes, Mr. Delogis, go right ahead.
Mike, yeah, I think we want to pick up the sound, right? Thank you. Sure.
Thanks very much, NRC, and thanks for coming. Thanks for doing all the prep work. We appreciate it. I really do appreciate that you're so responsive to our questions and requests. Go ahead, Art.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to give oral comments. My name is Art Dislogers, and I represent the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is the oldest and largest grassroots organization dedicated to protecting our environment and standing up for environmental justice. Environmental justice requires that those who are impacted by a public policy decision must get real and meaningful input into that decision. Tonight, my remarks center on the forced evaporation of water containing nuclear materials and other contaminants into the public air. The community fears that this is a threat to our health, our environment, and our economy. We are not reassured by the information provided by the NRC.
He read this. He wrote this.
History is replete with instances when people were exposed to deadly materials that were mistakenly thought safe. We just faced a similar threat of radioactive exposure with the planned discharge of 1 million gallons of radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay. Faced with this threat, our grassroots groups and stakeholders banded together to compel regulators to consider our health, our environment, and our economy. As a result, they issued a tentative ruling to deny Holtec this discharge permit. Today, there are still questions about this forced evaporation and how this will impact us. But our call is far more than the answers to these questions. Our call is to ensure we have a meaningful voice in any public process and policy that impacts us. That is the decision of whether to allow forced evaporation or not. Faced with this threat of forced evaporation, we will mobilize again. We are not powerless. This week I will file citizens legislation in the Massachusetts State House calling for a moratorium on this evaporation to a newly appointed commission studies and reports on its impact to our health, environment, and our economy. Like last time, we will collect more than 1 million signatures on a petition asking the governor to investigate the legality of this evaporation and defend the Clean Air Act. I and others from our coalition will give oral comments at the Plymouth Board of Health meeting this Wednesday and urge them to consider restrictions to this evaporation under Massachusetts general laws. We will relaunch our rallies, our marches, our public outreach, and much, much more. In closing, our request and our quest is for justice. We call on our elected public officials, our business community, our grassroots groups, and especially our residents to join us. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Vice Chair for once again allowing me to speak during public comment. I'm Dr. Barry Potvin, Chair of the Plymouth Board of Health. I have a doctoral degree in genetics and decades of prior experience as a research scientist at 3 different medical schools and as a college professor who taught genetics, biochemistry, microbiology, public health, and epidemiology. I had a busy career. NRC regulations appear to me from a public health perspective only to be flawed and inadequate in that they seem to be focused on acute external exposure to radiation for individuals rather than lower-level, more prolonged internal exposure through absorption, inhalation, or ingestion to our entire population. Since there is no safe dose of radiation, any radiation exposure above background levels, however minuscule, which I understand it is, does increase mutation risk and cancer risk rates in the population, resulting in more life-threatening illnesses and deaths. The genetic damage caused is also incremental in its nature. There are absolutely no benefits to the residents, visitors, or marine life that can justify the added risks from Holtec's completely avoidable possible actions when much safer alternatives exist. The local officials and concerned residents near the Indian Point reactor along the Hudson River in New York are trying desperately to convince Holtec to store the radioactive wastewater on site in stainless steel containers for up to 90 years in order to allow the tritium to decay to safe levels before being released. While not a Holtec project, the wastewater from the Yankee reactor in Vermont was actually shipped out to a licensed disposal facility rather than being released into the environment. Just because something is allowed by our current regulations doesn't mean that it's safe and doesn't mean that it doesn't create some public health risk. Our air, water, and oceans are all precious resources to us here in Plymouth that must be protected. All of us have no choice but to breathe the air and drink the water. Holtec will eventually complete the dismantling process, make a huge profit from remaining funds, and unlike all of us who live here, never suffer any possible health, environmental, or economic consequences of their actions, but they will certainly maximize their profits. Finally, please know that on this Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 p.m., the Plymouth Board of Health is once again hosting a public forum in this very room to further discuss environmental release of radioactive wastewater from the Pilgrim nuclear reactor. Speakers include the chair of the board for the Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility and the head of the Exposure Epidemiology and Risk Program, as well as the director of the EPA Harvard University Center for Ambient Particle Health Effects. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Hi, Diane Turco with Cape Town Windows, and thank you NRC and the panel and the NRC for coming and telling us how much radiation you've been dumping into our communities. It's a crime against humanity to be putting this garbage and this deadly material into our environment. You know, I was wondering that the reason that the water was being heated was to dry components, but I don't get it. Heating contaminated wastewater to improve worker comfort, worker conditions? That makes no sense, that you're heating contaminated nuclear wastewater for worker comfort. That makes no sense. So, right, I'd rather have stiff fingers in the cold weather. And you didn't even start it till March. You're saying that you're heating the water to warm up the building. Turn on your heaters for your workers. Secondly, I want to ask the NRC, is there a safe dose of radionuclide exposure for children? Mr. Watson? I just want, it's a yes or no. You don't have to just be.
Bruce, I'm sorry, for the recording,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind taking the mic.
I'm going to say the answer to the question is yes. The radiation standards in the United States are based on the International Commission on Radiation Protection, the National Committee on Radiation Protection, the National Academy of Sciences and other distinguished scientific communities. The NRC regulations are approved by the presidentially approved or appointed commission, and those standards are well below those recommended by the international community. And so, yes, they are safe, and they apply to all populations, including children. There's this distinct regulation for exposure to minors in the regulations in 10 CFR 20. So thank you.
Okay, like Dr. Potvin said, the regulations, they're not safe. And I would ask you to go look at the National Academy of Sciences Beer 7 report that clearly states there
Diane,
is no safe dose.
I'd like to
Okay,
have a conversation
anyways.
with you one of
Okay.
these days, and we can all get on the same
Okay.
wavelength, okay?
All right. I'm just talking about, so let me, so this is a letter that I submitted to the committee from Cape Town Winders, and this is in relation to the whistleblower letter. And I take responsibility for this because it was also sent to Cape Town Winders, so I take this very seriously. Cape Town Winders requests, this is to the NDCAP, Cape Town Winders requests that the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel advise Governor Maura Healey to initiate an independent investigation into the serious allegations as described in the attached letter dated August 18, 2023, sent to Cape Town Winders and the Mass Department of Public Health, Jack Priest. The allegations are related to forced evaporation of contaminated water, to worker and public health safety due to exposure of tritium in air vapors, release of airborne radionuclides in the environment with no monitors in the ventilation system or stack, and radiological and safety concerns to the workforce. This person put a lot on the line to protect their coworkers and the public. These allegations must be taken seriously. This is an emergency action, and we request immediate attention to this matter. That you have the NRC down here to respond to this, and they've already looked into it. It's the fox guarding the hen house. We need an independent investigation to determine the truth. And so I'm asking the NDCAP, your charge is to advise the governor.
You've made your
Okay.
statement.
Okay.
Thank you. There's a lot of people.
All right, so
There's a
will
lot of
the,
people behind
okay,
you.
so I just have a question.
There are a lot of people
Yes, I
behind you.
understand that. Can
And
I-
we're going on to the next one.
But I'm asking, will you advise the governor?
Not tonight. Next.
Okay.
Next. Next.
When will I
If
get
you're
an
not
answer?
gonna listen
Oh, no,
to
I
me,
know, but
I'm
Pine,
not gonna
just-
listen
I'm
to
just
you
asking,
any
When will
longer.
I get an answer? This is serious. This person put their job on the line to protect their
How do you know
workers.
that, Diane?
It looks
How do you know
pretty
that?
legitimate. How do you know it's not?
Well, for one thing, it wasn't accurate, so I don't trust it as much as you trust it. I don't trust it. So I think there needs to be some investigation. I'm sure.
I think there's some bias
sure-
in your
can-
comment. If there hasn't been an investigation.
There's no bias in my
You said it's not
comment.
accurate.
If there's no bias in yours, Diane.
I'm saying
Diane,
this is
next,
something that needs to be
please.
investigated.
I don't want to do this.
Okay.
I don't want to
All right,
do
just
this.
finish then. Last question.
I don't wanna do
When
this.
will I get an answer?
Huh?
When will I get an answer about this?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's how you serve
No.
the public.
I seem to be relegated to a member of the public, which is
I
fine.
didn't relegate you to a member of the
Yes,
public.
you did,
You stood up
Pine.
and
You,
stood
you
behind them.
denied my comments, my reading of that letter at least 3 times. But that's not really what I'm here to say.
We can
It
spend the
is-
whole night this way if you want to. The whole night. So get
Excuse
to your
me.
point. Get to your point or stop it. Really, the Pine to Bois show.
Thank you. I would just like to point out that for the entire year, several of us on the panel and everybody in the public, has wanted to talk meaningfully about tritium. And it's very interesting to me and very telling that the only chances we've had to talk about tritium have been the industry scientist, James Conca, who came and spent an hour really trying to get across the message that there's nothing to see here, folks, everything's fine, don't look up, there's no comet coming either, and you shouldn't worry your little heads about a nothing burger like tritium. It's a shame, because there really are some very distinguished scientists that we would have liked to present another point of view. And I think that the point of the NDCAP is to present a forum for open and balanced discussion of issues that are very important to the public. This is a decommissioning citizens advisory panel, which is why Diane has asked for the panel to petition Maura Healy to have an independent investigation. It seems to me that's very appropriate. But it's very disappointing that all efforts to influence or get an item on the agenda go virtually unacknowledged. I have never received an acknowledgement for any requests for agenda items. And I believe it's the same with perhaps Mary, perhaps Jim. It happens too much that there is no acknowledgement. We might as well have not bothered. Now, I understand it. There's a lot of work involved in fielding the business of the NDCAP, but it does seem to me that a very, very fundamental, there's a fundamental importance in acknowledging emails. And I am very sorry that this persists, this non-acknowledgement, this non-response, this basically dissing, this lack of respect for the very clear issues that engage the public and that the public wants to hear about. Would it hurt so much to have an open discussion about tritium with other experts? Would that be so hard?
Name, please.
Good evening, Eric Moschino. I'm a commercial lobster fisherman, so, perception is reality. I don't want this stuff in the water. In the movie Wall Street, Michael Douglas has a great line. He says, greed is good. There is some greed that is good. It drives innovation. It has driven the life that we lead to new levels of comfort. And there's a greed that's bad. I think that's what we're looking at right here. We know this company has money. So all this other stuff, to me, is just smoke and mirrors. You hear all these fancy numbers, everything. We can get rid of this waste. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys shipped 89,000 cubic feet of material this year. Is that correct?
I believe that number's right.
All right, so if you have 1.1 million gallons of water, about 7.5 gallons per cubic foot, that's another 150,000 cubic feet. Ship it. You have the money. Right? And then, we also have...
Excuse me. Oh, just dump it in somebody else's backyard. No, you're not. You're sitting down.
Excuse me, I'm talking. So, the other part of this, I'm glad the NRC is here, but who elected you? Nobody. The NRC, like every federal bureaucracy, is populated by unelected officials. Our government was never intended to have unelected officials create regulations. So I don't want this in our water. You got the money. Do the right thing. Good corporate citizens. I'm actually a fan of nuclear power. Be good corporate citizens. Do it right so we can have good, renewable, green energy going forward. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Danielson. I'm a resident of Plymouth, and I've got just a couple of comments and a couple of questions. My first question is, what happens to the other contaminants in that water when this is evaporated? I know there's a lot of talk about the tritium and the isotopes and all that, and there's a lot of discrepancy with those amounts, but what about the heavy metals? What about the other contaminants in that water? Where are those contaminants going? And this is not a comment, this is a question. I would like anyone who would like from the panel to please answer.
I'll answer that. Where the contaminants that concentrate in the water go to is they're removed by filtration and demineralization prior to the final disposition of the water. So
Okay.
they are filtered out, they're dried, and they're treated as solid waste.
Okay, so all of those other contaminants are removed in the evaporation process?
The ones, the other contaminants are concentrated in the evaporation process. They don't, the temperature of the water is not high enough to volatilize any of that material such that it gets entrained in the vapor. It remains in the water and it concentrates.
So the other chemical contaminants stay with the water that is not turned into vapor?
That's correct.
Okay, so then you have, at the end of the day, you have a higher concentration of pollution in the water, and then that's what is yet to be determined how it's going to be disposed of. Is that
Right,
correct?
that water is filtered and demineralized, and all but trace amounts of those elements are removed through that process. Same as if we would in a liquid discharge.
And are there documents showing what that water composition is after that effect? Like, how do we know?
They're in the submittal that we made to Mass DEP for the surface water discharge permit and to the EPA. We also presented information on historical information regarding the radionuclide concentrations at previous NDCAP meetings.
So those other chemical contaminants don't make their way out through the stack?
That's correct.
Okay. At what temperature? Is that, oh. They don't go out at the temperature, but then you still have a more concentrated form. Okay. So at this point where we were initially talking about 1.1 million gallons, somebody had said tonight that that number is now in the 900,000 gallon mark. I don't remember the exact number. So we are indeed evaporating water as a method of eliminating it.
The water evaporates based on scientific fact. It's an open pool of water, and that pool of water reduces just based on airflow, temperature differences between water and the surrounding air. That it's a scientific fact that water is going to evaporate.
Right, but what I'm questioning is the volume, because, you know, initially the whole thing was 1.1 million gallons, and again, I regret not writing the exact number down, but now we're up into the 900,000, so we're looking at about, 150,000 gallons of water, of a reduction in volume. So my question is, are we now, this doesn't seem to be the correct volume of evaporation for just a passive evaporation because you've got this open pool of water. It seems like that to me appears that we're evaporating the water as a means of reducing the volume to potentially have to dispose of down the line.
With the exception of that 90-day period of time that the heaters were installed and the temperature was raised approximately 18 to 20 degrees, there's nothing else going on but natural evaporation of that water.
Even after the addition of the heaters, the evaporators?
Beyond the heating period. So within that heating period, outside of that heating period, all of the water that has been lost is just natural evaporation.
Okay. Of course we can, because my next question is direct, excuse me? Right, because I'm asking a question, and Mr. Noyes was answering my question. You have interrupted people constantly all night long. I have one comment. And what's your point?
It's time for us to move on because we haven't even finished our agenda yet. It's not freedom of speech.
Yes, it is.
No. Okay. Listen, I know everybody wants to. Can you bring order to the room, sir? Is that why you're here?
They're all friends of ours, by the way. Police department, you know that?
I'm glad they are. You know what? Oh, God. All right.
There is no reason to have
Move
her
to
removed
adjourn.
by the police department.
Why don't you just let her speak and it'll get over?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to
Really?
continue. I'm going to continue. Ms. Dubois, my question is actually to you.
You're, oh, okay, great.
Wonderful. My question to you is, first of all, I do want to also request the fact that there is a formal investigation into that whistleblower letter, because if nothing else,
Thank God.
we do, I know, right?
Right.
Right? And I also would like to know why a panel member was censured this evening from presenting information more than once. And that is a question that is, and it's not a rhetorical question, I'd like to know.
Because a selectman isn't running this meeting, somebody that's not a politician is. And I don't have to put
Don't
up
throw the
with you.
selectman under the
And you
bus.
have, you're done.
This was all on you.
No,
You,
really?
multiple times,
If
said,
it was
I
on-
would like
if it
to
was-
know what Ms. Cosentino has to share with us.
We
Because that
found
information-
out, didn't we? Because Ms. Turco told us and she read it. So there you have
Right.
it. So can we move on now, or are we
Can
gonna?
we move on, or are you going to?
No,
be
because we
hostile?
can't move on, because this public body is so full of themselves, you won't listen to information. You're determined to throw this company under the bus, even though they're cleaning up your waste. They're protecting your body of water. They're protecting you, and they, in fact, listen, okay, listen to me for a second.
I think the police
Listen
need to
me
take
for a
you out,
second.
Ms. Dubois.
Listen, it's a good thing I didn't.
You're the one that's out of control.
You're right, I am. You know why? Because I've been doing this for so many years and listening to irrational stuff that will not listen to anything that's rational. You didn't listen to Conca when he was here. You shouted him down and raised your signs and didn't let any information flow. If we had been able to do that, we would have brought more people in. But we can't bring people in because you will not listen and you insist on dominating the room. And that's not what this panel is
Are
about.
you done?
And
So
this-
we,
no,
because you're
I'm
taking
not
over
done.
the public
No,
comments.
I am not done. I am not done. I can't put up with this anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, and it's time for you. And she's been off
Fine.
on it for 6 minutes,
Fine.
and I'm ready for the next
Someone
5.
needs to rein
Fine.
her in.
Fine. I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second?
Absolutely not. There are public comments.
Second.
If you deny those
This
comments.
is a, excuse me, this is a governor's advisory panel. We provide a set amount of time for members of the public to provide comment when we work through our agenda. We're supposed to be working through Robert's Rules of Order. This is
There is
not.
no order here.
There is, may I finish, please?
There's a motion on the table. I believe we are required to find a second if it is seconded.
second.
And then
I
vote.
second.
Isn't that correct?
Second by Mr. Pickering.
Any further discussion on the motion?
Ms. Dubois?
I'm going to step away while you deny these people the right to speak.
Well, this is my first meeting, and obviously it's going. It's going really well. So I don't know how this is ordinarily handled, but I would suggest public comment generally, if you don't have a time limit for individual speakers, you have a time limit for the block. On the agenda, there's a 30-minute time block that was put out. We didn't enter into it at 7:45 p.m. We entered into it at 8:22 p.m. We are closing in on 8:52 p.m., which would be the end of the 30-minute block. So that is a potential relief in terms of, I don't know why the panel is arguing with public commenters, and I don't know why it's as contentious as it is, but I don't think a solution to people getting upset, people have a right to make their comments, whether individuals agree with them or not. Everybody has a right to be heard within time limits and within reason, and within standardized frameworks that are adhered equally to everybody so that it's fair. And I don't think adjourning a meeting because we don't like what people are saying and because we've we're not making clear expectations of what they're saying.
I don't
is
think
the
that's an
appropriate-
accurate portrayal of the way I feel. It has nothing, it has not, well, hang on. It has nothing to do, it has nothing to do with whether I like what I'm hearing. It's, this meeting's out of control. There
But
is-
that's
there
why
is-
I'm saying
there
that
is
there's a
no-
30-minute
there are no-
time
There are no, hang on for a second.
You weren't recognized by the chair, I was.
People are speaking over.
Like you, for example, right now.
The chair.
You're speaking over me right now.
You just told me what I'm thinking, and I'm not.
I'm not. I was
Well, I'm gonna
recognized by
respond
the
to that.
chair, and you were
I'm going
not.
to respond to that as a member of this panel. You just said that I don't like what's being said. That's
did
not
not
the
say
case. You did say that.
Uh,
Yeah,
ma'am-
you did. And so, well, so there you have it. You have people not being recognized by the chair and yelling from the crowd. That's been happening all night. Yeah, really.
Okay.
Can I speak to the motion, please?
Please do.
I'm going to vote no on the motion. I would hope, however, the 1, 2, 3, 4 people in line would be given, let's say, 3 to 4 minutes and call it a day.
2 to 3, I think, at this point.
Yeah, but let them fairly make their point. I think we can do this agreeably, but I think we have to vote on the motion. Hate to say it, but I think we do.
Amend the motion to end the meeting at 9 o'clock.
I don't accept that.
Great.
Now we have
Any further discussion?
Okay.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
What are we voting on, Pine?
For adjourning the meeting.
I thought you had made an amendment to that.
It wasn't accepted.
I see, okay, got it then.
So now we have 2 motions.
No,
So-
can I ask a question? If I could
Mr.
ask a
Chair.
question, I'm sorry for.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? It's working. So we have 4 people left. Is there anybody else that wants to make public comment tonight? We have 4 people left, so I would amend my motion to adjourn and allow a few minutes for each of the 4 people to finish off and make their comment.
I would
So I need
second.
somebody to second it,
Second,
and then we can roll call it.
Mary Waldron, seconded.
Jen?
We're roll calling. Vote on the motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jen Burrell?
Yes.
Henrietta?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
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 Okay. If it's okay with the vice, could we invite our remaining speakers to come up? And someone, is 4 minutes a person sufficient for everybody?
I can do
Great.
it too.
Come on. Thank you.
I'll apologize in advance for any expletives. I'm still getting over my last job. I might drop a couple accidentally. Good to see you guys from the NRC. I feel like I get to speak here every decade or so. Honestly, kind of embarrassing to be a town Plymouth resident and watch you guys out here in the town with a foot in the grave for most of you because you're old, shouting at people while you get to sit here and watch them talk. It's kind of embarrassing to be a part of this community. I'm looking at the numbers, and from what I'm understanding, I've gotten probably far higher doses working in the military with some of these radiations than you guys ever receive in a lifetime. Honestly, if we can come to a good understanding, if you can ship it out, cool, if that saves time and money and the circus going on back and forth here that I'm paying for with my fucking tax dollars. Yeah, that'd be much appreciated. Act like adults. That's what you are.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next person.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you to the members of the panel. Thank you to the gentleman from the NRC for coming up for, I think, more than usually lively meeting, unfortunately, for all here. So I'm Ben Cronin. I live in Duxbury. I just wanted to note that the reasoning which the let me start over.
We've heard a lot tonight about the federal side of things. We've heard the NRC, and I do thank them for coming. But as we have seen from the 724 determination by the department, and as Mr. Pickering adverted to, the federal side is not the only side of this. There's also the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a great deal to say about this. Now, one of the longstanding arguments that we have made and that the state adopted in that determination was that there's no preemption in this instance. I know we're running short, so I won't go through all of the pieces of evidence, but if you look at the settlement agreement itself, of course, there's at number 10L, the stipulation that, quote, Holtec shall comply with all applicable environmental and human health-based standards and regulations of the Commonwealth, end quote. Number 16 is not directly related to preemption, but I do think it's germane to the situation with respect to evaporation. And that states, nothing in this agreement shall release any person from the obligation to investigate and remediate new, undiscovered, or undisclosed releases of radiological contamination or non-radiological oil or hazardous materials in accordance with federal or Massachusetts statutes and regulations. I think number 48 is actually quite critical in the settlement agreement because both parties, including the Commonwealth, agree that, quote, no party to this agreement or any person or entity affiliated or related to a party to this agreement shall assert that any provision of this agreement or the agreement itself is invalid under any federal law or any provision of the U.S. Constitution. In other words, the contracting parties have agreed not to make preemption arguments. So even if we didn't have the settlement agreement, there's still the matter of case law. We can see a series of cases, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a historian by training, but there are a number of cases descending, you might say, from the 1983 case Pacific Gas and Electric Company versus State Energy Resources and Development Commission. Justice White, Byron White, writing for the majority in that case, said, quote, even where Congress has not entirely displaced state regulation in a specific area, state law is preempted to the extent that it actually conflicts with federal law. And again, as we saw with the Ocean Sanctuaries Act, I would argue we have relevant statutes with respect to air pollution, particularly the Mass Clean Air Act. I just wanted to note a concurring opinion by Justice Harry Blackmun in that case, and I'll try to close out after with Justice Gorsuch, sort of from the other side of the jurisprudential aisle. But Justice Blackmun writes, quote, federal preemption of the state's authority to decide against nuclear power would create a regulatory vacuum. In making its traditional policy choices about what kinds of power are best suited to its needs, the state would be forced to ignore the undeniable fact that nuclear power entails certain risks. While the NRC does evaluate the dangers of generating nuclear power, it does not balance those dangers against the risk, costs, and benefits of other choices available to the state, or consider the state's standards of public convenience and necessity, end quote. Finally, in the most recent case, Virginia Uranium Inc. v. Warren, a 2019 case, Justice Gorsuch, again, very different justice than Justice Blackmun, wrote, quote, invoking some brooding federal interest or appealing to a judicial policy preference should never be enough to win preemption of a state law. A litigant must point specifically to, quote, a constitutional text or a federal statute, end quote, that does the displacing or conflicts with state law, end quote. So we did hear a lot, Madam Vice Chair, from the federal side of things, and certainly we obviously, I think, are grateful to hear from them, but there is the state side of things, and I think that also plays a key role in this situation with the evaporation. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good evening. I'm Joanne Wilson Keenan, and pardon me, I'm from East Dennis, Massachusetts, and I very much appreciate the chance to be able to say what I wrote for tonight. At Senator Markey's field hearing in May 2022, Congressman William Keating, my congressman, reminded Dr. Krishna Singh, president of Holtec, that his company had promised the community and elected officials a transparent decommissioning process. Keating added that in November 2021, Holtec repeated several times the company has not made any definitive plan to dispose of the spent fuel pool liquid. Just weeks later, however, Keating's office contacted the NRC and learned that Holtec was planning to dump irradiated water into the bay in the first quarter of October 2022. Keating stated, "That raises issues, and my concern is ongoing regarding transparency in that regard." The conversation on May 6th between Keating and Singh turned to ways of disposing the water other than dumping. They discussed trucking the water off-site, and Singh voiced concern about the effect of diesel fuel on the environment to ship that water. And he calculated later that it would have been 125,000 gallons of diesel fuel spewing up into the air. He said, "Now, trucking on the face of it is a poor solution in our opinion." That is a direct quote from Dr. Singh. Then he continued, quote, "Also, we can locally evaporate the water using electric heaters. That will environmentally damage as well," end quote from Dr. Singh. Fast forward to last month when Mike DiMiano of the Boston Globe wrote that based on a letter from an anonymous whistleblower, quote, "Activists accused Holtec of improperly evaporating wastewater and releasing radioactive water vapor into the open air," end quote. This is forced evaporation. DiMiano added, quote, "Holtec acknowledged installing heaters in the wastewater pool, which sped up the evaporation. But a spokesperson for the company insisted that the amount of water evaporated was small and that the procedure was part of the normal course of dismantling the plant." According to the article, Neil Sheehan of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said that the radioactive emissions from the evaporation were, quote, "well within federal limits," end quote. Later, he stated that the NRC does not know the amount of water that was evaporated. I'm almost finished. Christine Laguerre of the Provincetown Independent reported that Patrick O'Brien, a Holtec spokesman, wrote in an email, quote, "Evaporative releases have occurred since 1972, which was mentioned tonight, and are monitored and reported as part of required environmental reporting annually." Laguerre added that while Pilgrim was operating, hundreds of thousands of gaseous effluent caused by heat coming off the spent fuel pool came off, where the radioactive assemblies were being stored, and those were released annually. But the spent fuel rods are now in concrete casts, so the pool no longer generates heat that results in that kind of evaporation, which was also mentioned tonight. So returning to the statements by Dr. Singh and the company officials, we are left to consider which of these statements are true. Is this business as usual? Nothing to see here? Move along, as the company spokesperson suggests? Or is forced evaporation of the water a dangerous option that causes environmental damage, as CEO Singh suggests? In either case, going back to Representative Keating's words, these statements raise issues and our concern of ongoing transparency from Holtec.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
5 minutes, okay. Hi, I'm Pat Watson. On the subject of tritium, a little perspective. When my daughter was a baby, she had to have vaccinations, which I was happy to have. But at the time, they were going through the transition of that there was mercury as a preservative in the vaccination. I told my pediatrician I didn't want it. What could we do? Luckily, he ran out of them. He, like medical doctors all at that time would say, you know, it's not a big deal, la-di-la-la, just a little bit of mercury, right? But I said to him, there's mercury in the fish, there's mercury in the water, there's mercury in the lake, there's mercury in the ocean. There's no reason to add one more dangerous element to the environment or to our children. And that's how I feel about tritium. You can sit there and say, well, there's only this much of tritium. Don't worry about it. But you just said, there's tritium here, there's tritium there, there's tritium in the exit signs where they make it light up. It's a lot of different places. Bottom line is the NRC, the Canadian Nuclear Commission, they all say that certain amounts of tritium eventually does cause cancer. That's fact. So I understand the NRC's job is to go with the guidelines. You got guidelines. They're allowed to do X, Y, and Z. Holtec's job, you're allowed. Your job is very narrowly defined. EPA's job is narrowly defined. Us as a public, we have to take everything into account, not just what the guidelines of what a decommissioning nuclear power plant does, what it can, what it can't do, what are the guidelines, what are all these slides. At the end of the day, I'm protecting my children, my grandchildren, and all of our families. We need to not allow every single time somebody tells us, well, it's only this much. How many times have we been told it's only this much of a dangerous element that we know is not safe for the environment? It is our job as the public to say, no, we can't have any more. We have enough in the environment. You just admitted it. So there's a certain, you just have to stop. You just have to stop for the safety of the globe and our families. And this is why, and right now the permit is temporarily on the hold, which is great. Right now we have to investigate the, if it's called Forest Radio Wastewater Act, if that's that, we need to investigate that for the safety of our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that want to make a statement?
Only online.
Okay, so, Vice Chair, I have a suggestion. So, can I have 2 minutes?
Sure.
So, not a shining example of how we want to run the NDCAP, I think, on either side tonight. So I have a couple of suggestions so we can improve communication between the panel. Our mission is to advise the governor on concerns from the public, right? So what would be helpful to the panel members is we have to develop an agenda every other month. So there's an opportunity, right, to formalize between the members, hey, I'd like to bring this up for discussion for an agenda item. And we can all look at what your suggestion is, give feedback, and then as a panel, we can determine, yeah, we think that's good for the panel to discuss, and we add it to the agenda. Okay, so that's a little more burdensome for all of us on the panel to look at that, and not just come up to the meeting and say, I want to put this on the agenda tonight when we start to the meeting, and we stick to the agenda. For members of the public that have information, Ms. Turco had some information, Dr. Potvin had some information on a meeting that's coming up. I'm sorry, I forget your name, from the Sierra Club. Thanks. It would be helpful if you could give us that in writing, and then we can add it to the meeting minutes and to be able to discuss that at the panel, because we all look at what meeting minutes went on from the previous meeting, like tonight. We'll put meeting minutes together for this, or try to capture everything that went on, for us to discuss, bring it back, review it, approve it, put it out. If you give us those documents, it gives us an opportunity to look at it, and not just in 30 seconds or 3 minutes at the microphone say, yeah, that's a good thing, or no, I'm not listening to you, and that's a crazy thing, and we don't want to do that. Give it to us in writing, submit it in the meeting minutes, and then it's part of the official record of the meeting. So that's my suggestion.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and always appreciate your thoughts, Jack. But I think that would require getting the draft agenda to the panel out a little earlier, so members of the panel can look at it and say, gee, I wanted to add this, or I'd like to add that. If you don't get it until a Wednesday or Thursday, That's pretty late.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to speak for Pine, but I know how challenging it is to put the agenda together and to get speakers, right? And get speakers to commit, to get a copy of their document, to get a copy of the presentation,
And
to
have
get it
nobody
in the
listen.
agenda. So
Right.
we, as a panel member, could help whoever the chair or vice chair is that's putting that agenda together going forward.
I appreciate your suggestion too, Jack. I think it would make a big difference, and it would really bring a measure of transparency which has not existed until now.
That is so ridiculously unfair.
So normally, I wouldn't ask a question when somebody would raise their hand in the public because we're talking panel business and we set public expectations. I think for the next meeting, we should have a discussion with the people that are in attendance to explain what the rules are at the start of the meeting so we don't get back and forth on, I want to speak and I can't speak and I can't ask a question. But I'll entertain.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that idea, what you're suggesting, that's awesome, and we really kind of tighten everything up. I'd also like to ask too, if you have documents that you can share with us, like I asked. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, this is a great suggestion, I think it'll really pull all the information together. And I introduced that request so that you guys will take care of it. I just wanted a date of when I would know. But also, too, if you could share your information.
Yeah.
I've asked for documents, like what you guys, was going on with the whistleblower letter, and it was read tonight, but I would love to have read it ahead of time so I could have come to the meeting informed. So I think it'd be really great if you shared your documents, too, maybe when you put out the agenda. Anything that's going to be read here could be added on that agenda so we could be informed and
I
come here. That
can't
would be
commit
great.
to doing that all the time because some of the things are
I
vetted between the
understand.
state
Yes.
agencies,
Right.
right? And some things may be involved in litigation, and we may not get it to the last minute. But that doesn't mean we can't take what we were provided tonight, put that into the meeting minutes, have that posted, available to the public, and then at the next meeting, if there's a follow-up question to what we put in, we could set the agenda up to
Because
do
we got the
that.
NRC meeting, the NRC slides ahead of time, so we were able to know what was going to be here rather than big surprises.
Fair
But I'd
enough.
appreciate that. Thank you.
I think we voted to adjourn.
If it's okay.
Another hand up in the back.
We have one more hand up in the back.
I believe we voted, point of order, I believe vote we took was that we would adjourn after those four speakers, which I believe means we are now adjourned.
I'll listen to what you want to say.
Thank you. I think that your idea is fantastic for those who might have something written down, but I think a lot of people come here and listen to what's presented.
Yeah.
And then we have things that we want to ask and state. And I don't think that it's right when somebody has a different opinion that they interrupt and try to censor, because that's dangerous to our United States and our Bill of Rights. So I understand completely that you want to put it together, but then
Yeah.
that would mean that people wouldn't interrupt people.
So I'll just say, tonight was kind of exceptional. I mean, we haven't had a meeting, my words kind of devolve to where we were shouting back and forth across each other like that. So we need a check, maybe the new chairperson, when we elect a new chairperson, we have a break. You know, we're heading on 2.5, almost 3 hours into a meeting here, to have a break and let people cool down or come back or develop what their follow-up question is and provide that opportunity to the public to ask it.
For sure, but this is definitely a major issue with putting nuclear material in our air and our water.
We
It will
don't
affect our area.
We don't disagree with you.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.